You. My name is Tatiana Castellino. I'm one of the dietitians here at Pro Healthcare, and I have the pleasure of talking about mindful eating and managing portions this evening. The majority of my specialties are in outpatient education, specifically in diabetes and disordered eating. And so the idea of mindful eating and the practice around this is something that I talk about a lot with my disordered eating clients because research has shown such a great connection between the two. The good thing is mindful eating is a practice that really all of us can benefit from. And so we're going to talk about what it is and what it looks like, and give you some, hopefully, new strategies or tools to help you build or maintain a healthy relationship with the foods that you're choosing. And then also how we can use mindful eating as we are managing our portions to better match maybe what our body needs or to better match what our health goals are, since we all know that portion sizes have gotten a little bit bigger over time. So we're going to take a look at that a little later as well. So what is mindful eating? Well, mindful eating is a practice based on mindfulness. And mindfulness is considered a form of meditation that helps us recognize and cope with our emotions and physical sensations. So it's really this idea of being fully present and fully aware of our internal and external surroundings and experiences so that we can make the most mindful or present choice that meets our needs. And so we've probably all heard this concept of mindless eating, where we're just really not present. Mindful eating is the complete opposite of this. And with this fully present and mindfulness, we are practicing this awareness without criticism or judgment. So today we're going to dig into this idea of good and bad and how we sometimes will dichotomize our food choices or how we feel about ourselves when we are interacting and making decisions with food. And mindful eating really helps us to remove that good, bad, black, white, criticism, judgment, because we all have been there where I shouldn't have done that. I feel bad. That was a bad choice. Well, the whole day's shot. I'm just going to wait till tomorrow. Or if we're in this time of the year, how many of us have had the thought, well, the holidays are too hard. I'm not going to be able to be good. I'm not going to be able to stay on track. And so I'm just going to wait till January 1. The practice of mindful eating allows us to really live in the moment and make these most informed decisions and choices about why we are eating what we're eating, how we are eating, and then be able to move on with our life in that day without bringing that shame, judgment, criticism with us that can then impact our decisions later on that day or potentially for the rest of the week, or in this case, the rest of the year. So that paying full attention, like what does that really mean? Well, we need to be aware of what's going on inside and outside of our bodies. So what type of distractions do we have, right? How often are we eating in front of the television, eating in a car while we're driving, eating while we're scrolling on our smartphones, eating while we're playing on our iPads, right? We have all of these external distractions or external things happening outside of our body that are distracting us from paying full attention to also what's going on inside of our body. So what kind of hunger am I experiencing? I say, is it physical hunger or mental hunger, right? Is it hunger from up in the head or is it hunger from down in our belly? Well, being able to differentiate between those two allows us to make a better decision when it comes to what we're having to eat. Inside of our body in terms of hunger and fullness, right? How hungry am I? How full am I? When do I start and when do I stop? We're going to take a look at that this evening. Like all of the fun things about food in terms of how colorful something is on the plate. What are the aromas and the scents that we experience? You know, we all know that when we walk by a Subway, boom, that's a Subway because Subway's got a smell. Or you walk past an Annie Ann's, it's got a scent, right? Like these are really recognizable things. Can we say that about other foods that we might be eating on a regular basis and really enjoying that scent piece of it? Textures. How often are we really differentiating between a softer tomato and a crunchy piece of romaine in that single bite with our salad and being able to experience the juxtaposition between those two textures? What do things actually taste like, right? How often do we eat something and it's gone before we know it and we didn't really taste it, or I don't think I really enjoyed that. Let me go back for more. So really being mindful of what does it taste like? What are these temperatures? What are the sounds? right? If something is crunchy, does it bring that sound piece into it of what I'm hearing? And when we can engage all of our senses, research shows time and time again that we can get greater satisfaction from less food consumed because we're really getting everything out of it that it has to offer. Like I mentioned, where are we feeling that hunger? Where are we feeling that satisfaction? And sometimes it can be confusing. Am I satisfied or am I full? Or sometimes people will say, well, I was full, but I wanted more, right? And really being able to kind of unpack that and separate those two to say, well, food is going to provide us fullness. If we're still wanting more food, what is it that we're actually trying to fill? Because if our stomach is full, there's no more room for food. Putting more in there isn't going to make it feel better. What is half full, three-quarters of the way full? How often do we eat so fast that before we know it, we've just eaten what we normally do? We're done with the meal, and then the brick hits us in our bellies, right? We're just like, oh my gosh, roll me to the couch. I'm so full. I can't move. I need to undo my pants. Well, what if we slow down and we practice this mindful eating? We're paying full attention and we acknowledge, okay, my stomach's 50% of the way there. If I finish what's on my plate, I'm going to get to 100%. Do I want to be at 100% full, or is that going to be uncomfortable? And do I need to maybe pivot and make an adjustment about how much of this plate I'm going to finish? And then again, avoiding that judgment criticism, right? How often is it that we say, I shouldn't have done that, that was a bad choice, and negative begets negative. It's really hard for us to pivot out of a negative mindset into making really positive and life enriching decisions. And I hear people say, well, if I kind of have to beat myself up, right? I got to feel bad about it to like make a change. Research does not support that that works long term. And so being a mindful eater and making these really insightful and present decisions around food allows us to minimize and even, tackle any type of critical thought that comes after because, well, no, I made this decision for all of these reasons. I acknowledged my hunger. I stopped when I was full. I minimized distractions. I got as much enjoyment out of that meal or snack as possible because all of my senses were engaged. How can I be critical about that choice? Right? So we can see that paying full attention can require a bit more work around eating than we're used to. But I really think that this is a piece of our relationship with food in our society now that is missing. And that if we were to bring in to all of our meals and snacks and our choices around food, we'd really be able to be hitting our health goals a lot sooner without following really restrictive diets, without having to do, the cleanses and the things that we might not be sustainable at. But being a mindful eater is something that we can absolutely be sustainable at over the long term. Like I said, distractions from all different sources, they take away our attention from fully enjoying our food. Eating has unfortunately become a mindless act. And for a lot of people, it's a chore. It's something, I don't want to do the laundry. I don't want to do the dishes. I don't want to pay my bills, but I got to do them, right? We got to eat because we have to eat. We're humans, and that's our fuel source, right? We can't expect our cars to run if we don't go to the gas station and put gas in them. Food is fuel. Unfortunately, when we get into these very, I call reactive states with eating, right? We haven't thought about it. We haven't been proactive. We aren't anticipating our potential triggers or knowing what our schedule looks like to be able to set ourselves up for success around fueling our body. We get into very reactive choices. I'm so hungry because it's been 8 hours since I last ate. Give me the first thing that I can get my hands on, the thing that's going to go down the fastest. I don't have time or the patience to cook at this point. And boom, we make a mindless and an impulsive decision around food. But if we can start to be more mindful around our choices, it's no longer going to be this mindless act that is reactive, but then also happens very quickly. We need to remember that our body, being this machine, needs time to process the fuel that we're putting in it. And so if we can get down an entire meal's worth of nutrition and calories in 7 minutes, our body, our stomach, our brain, our organs really haven't had a time to like process, oh, we're eating, we've eaten enough, we feel full. It takes on average about 20 minutes for that conversation to happen between our digestive system and our stomach and those stretch receptors from that stomach organ and our brain that register, oh, we're feeling full. So if we're eating something in 5 minutes, we're doing it mindlessly, we're doing it quickly, it's very easy for us to go back for seconds or to say, I'm still hungry, I need more. And then when we finally get to that 20 minutes, oh my gosh, I blew past my fullness 15 minutes ago. I just wasn't aware of it. And so we really want to acknowledge how we can minimize these reactive decisions that usually are less healthy and impulsive, but then they also happen too quickly. So eating mindfully helps us to physically slow down, gives us an opportunity to really recognize, am I hungry? Am I full? Which I'm going to show you a hunger fullness scale. It's a very quantitative tool that we can use as we start to learn what our physical hunger and fullness feels like. And then also increases our awareness of these triggers so that we can anticipate kind of what I call booby traps, right? So for example, I work at the hospital 4 to 5 days a week and I'm here 8, 9 hours. Well, that's over my lunch break, right? I don't know if anybody's been to the hospital recently, but I think we've got a pretty decent cafeteria. There's tons of choices up there. They put out a new menu, there's rotating stuff. If I didn't have my lunch brought from home, I know that a trigger would be I'm going to get hungry around 11:30, 12 o'clock. And if I don't have food with me, I'm going to walk upstairs and I don't always know if I'm going to be in the best, let's say mindset, right? If they have something I'm really, really liking, well, if I'm overly hungry, if it's available, let's say it's less expensive than something else, that's a potential trigger. So I anticipate that trigger and I put my lunches together on Sunday and boom, I bring them every day to work so that that is a choice that I don't have to wrestle with, that I don't have to be, fighting that reactive or impulsive response because I have the solution. So if you know what your triggers are, whether they be times of day and work shifts like I'm describing, or triggers like particular external triggers like people, right? You go over to somebody's house, a family member, and they're usually showing their love with food. If you can go over in a more full state, it's going to be easier to say, no, thank you. I have no room in my stomach. I am full. I ate before I came, right? And we can anticipate making those healthier choices. So being mindful of what are the triggers in our lives that we can start to make proactive decisions about so that we can be mindful, right? On Sundays, when I make my lunches, I'm incredibly mindful because I know what my schedule is going to be. I know how much time I'm going to have for my lunch break. I can put these things together after I've eaten breakfast. I'm not hungry, right? I've committed to those items. I've already purchased them. It's a very mindful act versus I got to, lunch late because the session ran over, yada, yada, yada. I'm super, super hungry. I got to run upstairs. I only have 15 minutes to eat. And now I need to pick something that's going to go down super fast. Less mindful, we would call that a mindless choice. So being aware of those triggers and being able to plan accordingly. Why do we want to be mindful eaters? Well, research shows that it can help with various conditions, such as those eating disorders, also other mental health concerns like depression and anxiety. And this is that practice of meditation of mindfulness, but applying that specifically to our mindful eating. Now, we also see in research that being a mindful eater can help to promote weight loss or managing our weight through different, life circumstances. One, when we're more mindful, we aren't going to make those reactive choices. So we're likely going to be choosing things that are more in line with our health goals. We can also be better matched with portions, which we'll talk about later tonight, by being a mindful eater because we're incorporating those hunger fullness scales of when to start and when to stop. And it also helps to change, right, our feelings or our thoughts around food so that we don't have that negative begets negative. Well, I messed up at breakfast and there's no way to come back from this. I already made it a bad choice. So the rest of the day is going to be bad. I'll start over tomorrow, or I'll start over on Monday, or again, I'll start over on January 1st. Imagine if we make a choice that, hey, you know what? I acknowledge that wasn't congruent with my health goals, but I've got 2 more meals and 2 more snacks anticipated for today, and I can definitely make more mindful or health conscious choices around them. Well, now that single meal that would have otherwise kind of thrown away an entire day is just a blip. It's just one meal in the context of a whole day versus the whole day's worth of food choices that'll likely result in higher calories, higher carbs, higher fat content. So there's definitely a connection between mindful eating and weight management. And then it goes in line with those triggers, helps us to manage and reduce our emotional external eating. So yes, we want to be mindful of our external cues, right? Minimizing those distractions, but we also need to be mindful of how many times are we engaging in emotionally driven eating and externally driven eating. So emotionally driven eating is eating for emotional responses. I'm stressed and I want to go eat something crunchy because eating those hard pretzels allows my body to physically release some of the tension and the stress that I'm experiencing. Or I'm sad and I have beautiful memories of eating ice cream with my mom and she would give me a hug. And so when I'm sad or I'm in a low state, I'm going to go and eat ice cream because there's an emotional connection there. And that ice cream is managing unhealthfully, but doing something with those emotions. And then external eating is eating in response to environmental cues. So whether this is, again, somebody saying, here, eat this, I made it for you, right? We see this a lot at the holidays. Well, I made this especially for you. Don't you like it? Don't you want more? Or external eating, like if you work at an office per se, and somebody decides to bring in Kringle. Or I've heard a client talk about her Fatty Fridays. So at her workplace on Fridays, everybody brings in these relatively unhealthy items because that's how they celebrate their Fridays in the end of the week. That would be a tough external eating trigger for anybody, right? When you're surrounded by foods that you might not be eating on a regular basis and it's, hey, it's the end of the week. So by being mindful around our eating choices, we can really help to tackle these tough moments of whether it's emotion driven or we have that external cue of saying, here, eat, even if our body is not saying the same thing. So what does mindful eating look like specifically? Well, there are 5 components to a mindful eater or a mindful eating experience. First is observation, and that's just being present, right? We're noticing our body. We're noticing what are the symptoms or how do I know that I'm hungry? Am I experiencing shakiness or low energy? If we get too hungry, am I getting irritable or what some people might describe as the hangry, right? And then on the flip side, noticing your body as it's getting fuller and how that feels different, right? What does the weight of the food feel like in your stomach? Are you starting to, feel your skin push against your pants in a different way as food is now filling that stomach organ and taking up some space? Observations, noticing things. In that same way that we observe, we can also savor, right? We can savor all of the senses around eating. What does something feel like in our mouth or when we crunch or chew on it? As it, if it is ice cream and it melts in the mouth, really savoring that experience. What does something look like? People that know me have heard me say one of my biggest qualms about Thanksgiving dinner is that it's all the same color, right? It's just different shades of tan and white and brown from the turkey and the mashed potatoes and the gravy and the stuffing. It's all just the same color. Versus when we look down at, let's say a salad, or we make a more colorful Thanksgiving where we are, instead of doing regular mashed potatoes, we're doing mashed sweet potatoes. And then we're going to have Brussels sprouts and we're going to do a wild rice stuffing or a black rice stuffing that's got, these deep purples in it or oranges and now you're looking at something that's a rainbow of colors. Your eyes are just going to be, ooh, it's beautiful, right? Or when we make a salad, can we get all the colors in there, right? Can we do red tomatoes and orange carrots and yellow peppers and green lettuce and purple cabbage? And now you've got all these colors of the rainbow. You look down at it, we eat with our eyes first. And so being mindful about, what does my food look like? What does it taste like? Is it spicy? Is it sweet? Is it too salty? When I eat these things, am I noticing that different flavors are hitting on different parts of my tongue, right? We know that different flavors are experienced on different areas of the tongue. So whether it's salty or bitter or sweet, these happen in different physical areas. By savoring our food, we can start to be more aware of that and get so much more out of every bite. Being aware. So this is really, like we said, paying full attention. That's really the umbrella theme here. Am I really tasting? Am I savoring? Am I present in this moment? Or am I just mildly munching? And the example here is, you do a bag of popcorn, you're going to sit down and you maybe watch Yellowstone on Sunday or watching a movie or something, right? You sit down on the couch with your bag of popcorn, your bowl of popcorn, and you're watching, you're doing your thing. And before you know it, you get like the salt or like the little bit of stuff underneath your nails because you hit the bottom of the bag and you're like, where did the popcorn go? I'm already done. And then to boot, we're very good that this happens with popcorn all the time. You're putting the next handful of popcorn in your mouth before you fully swallowed the previous bite of popcorn. We've all been there. If you haven't thought that you've done it, next time you eat popcorn, maybe we'll be mindful. But it's the hand just goes. It just goes, and it only stops when there's nothing else there. So being fully aware so that we aren't just mindlessly munch, and before we know it, something's gone. That practice of non-judgmental speak. So you'll see here, noticing when shoulds or rigid rules or guilt pop into your mind. In the therapeutic world, we say that should is a shaming word. So when we use self-talk that involves should, I should not do that, I should have done this, it will inherently bring an underlying level of shame and that negative emotion, that guilty feeling. And again, negative begets negative. And so if we do make a choice, rather than shaming ourselves or, hurting ourselves with negative self-talk, let's say there's nothing I can do about the choice that's already been made. What can I learn about it? What were the triggers that got me into that position? What dynamics or distractions or pieces of this puzzle can I change so that that doesn't happen again? Because I don't like how I feel right now. There's nothing I can do but learn, right? I can only move forward. But if I don't want to feel this way again, what are the pieces of the puzzle that got me here? And how can I modify them or anticipate them differently in the future so that I don't feel this way again? That type of language is more than likely going to result in positive moving forward and helping you to progress closer to your health goals rather than feeling stuck, feeling shame, feeling bad. And if at any point you have created a relationship between emotions and eating, right, that emotionally eating, shame and guilt and feeling bad about ourselves is a very strong emotional state. And if we have conditioned ourselves to turn to food in that moment, all we're doing is perpetuating this harmful cycle. And then staying in the moment. So one of the biggest practices of mindfulness, not just when it comes to eating, but just mindfulness as a meditative state, is it's very common for the mind to flow to different thoughts, right? We can just be sitting doing something, and before we know it, our mind is thinking about, did I take the laundry out this morning? And that's okay. When we are practicing mindful eating, when that happens, when we find that our thoughts or our mind are going somewhere else or flowing somewhere else, it's a simple, oh, wait, nope, we're right here, we're in front of the plate, we're in this moment, we're in this conversation, we're eating this meal, let's come back to center. And that may need to happen 10 different times during the course of a meal, and that's okay. Always bringing ourselves back to in the moment and making sure that any of those distractions that are keeping us away from that eating experience, we are minimizing. So if you are a person that eats on the couch or eats in bed in front of a TV, it would start with, I'm going to go sit, at the dinner table. Or you might feel uncomfortable sitting at the dinner table. There's not enough sounds. Maybe we're going to put on some soothing music. If anybody's like me, this is the best time of year, Christmas tunes all the way around. So maybe if we're going to minimize that, the screen and the sounds from the TV, especially if we're eating by ourselves, it's not uncommon to feel lonely, right? If it's quiet and we're by ourselves. But let's go to the table, let's put down a placemat, let's use the nice plates, let's put on the Christmas music, and now we can be fully aware to practice this mindful eating. And one of my favorite parts of mindful eating is this full awareness of hunger and fullness. Now, I will tell you one of the most common questions that I ask my clients, because they'll tell me I was hungry. And I say, what does hunger feel like to you? And 9 out of 10 times I get the answer, well, I wanted to eat. That is not hunger. Thinking about food, seeing food, smelling food does not necessarily equate to physical hunger. Like I said before, if we want our car to run, we got to put enough gas in it. We do not stop at the gas station when our tank is full. We do not need to be putting fuel into our machines, into our bodies, if our tanks are full. And hunger and fullness are a way for our body to communicate with us individually to say, I'm ready for a fill up and I need you to stop pumping the gas. We're almost there. We're almost at full. I don't want you to overfill this tank. So the scale that I have in front of you there goes from 0 to 10. 0 being and it might be a little crass, but some people, they can relate. 0 is, I'm so hungry I could eat the cow. 10 is, I'm so full I feel like the cow. And 5 is completely neutral, right in the middle. A healthy relationship with food and a mindful eater never gets to a 0 or a 1. They really kind of start eating around a 2.5, 3. And we never get to a 9 or a 10. We stop at an 8. And a healthy relationship with food has us riding this scale all day long. So you might wake up in the morning like me and I'm hungry. I'm ready to eat within 30 minutes of waking up. My body's like, give me food. So I'm going to eat breakfast, right? I acknowledge that I'm at that 2.5, and I'm going to stop eating my breakfast once I get to an 8. And then I know that by 11:30, my lunchtime, I'm at a 2. I'm happy it's my lunch break. I've got my food on hand. Boom. And I know that it stops me at an 8. I also know that by about 3:30, I better have packed a snack because my body is down back to a 2.5, 3 dinner, right? And it's normal to ride this scale back and forth. How often do I hear my clients say, I I guess when they see the scale, I don't really ever feel anything less than a 5. And then we live between a 5 and a 10, and we wonder why we're finding it hard to lose weight. Well, if we're always filling our fuel tank past what it needs, we're going to be giving our bodies more energy than it can potentially process. And so it's going to start to store itself, right? It's going to store it on our body. And so using this hunger fullness scale can really help us to make more informed decisions about when we eat, but also how much we eat. So when we talk about managing portions in a little bit, this is really a non-negotiable tool as part of that, because we need to let our body, that internal cue, be part of that solution. How often do I have folks tell me, well, I mean, I've always eaten this way. Yeah, and that may be the case, but at 18, were you more active than you are today? Well, yeah, I helped my dad on the farm. Okay, at 65, what does your day look like? I mean, I might get 3,000 steps a day. Okay, our fuel tanks are simply different sizes. At 18, not only is the metabolism stronger and the body needs more calories, but now we're also expending so many more because we're on our feet getting 10, 12, 15, 20,000 steps. We fast forward a couple decades, and it's natural for the human body to need less energy as it ages. Metabolism can decline, but now we're not as active. We don't need to be feeding our body and filling the tank the same way that we used to because the tank is simply smaller. The tank gets smaller regardless of energy expenditure. So one of the natural courses of aging is that the body can lose bone and muscle mass, both of which are very metabolically active. These are tissues in our body that require more calories and more energy than, let's say, fat mass. Well, if we have 20% less muscle and bone mass at 60 than we did at 20, our caloric needs are going to be 20% lower. And so the beauty is the human body will adjust hunger and fullness as its needs change. The problem we get into is when we are only eating for external reasons. Well, I've always eaten at this time. I've always eaten this much. This is how much food is getting served to me. Clean plate club. This is how much food is in front of me. And so I'm going to finish it because that's what I've been trained to do. Those practices really don't bring in that mindfulness, and certainly not that internal mindfulness of how big is my tank, how much food do I need to fill it. Now, a 0 to 10 can be maybe overwhelming if we are unfamiliar with using a scale like this. So maybe you start with a 1 to 5. 1 is, I'm too hungry, I waited too long. 2 is, start eating. 3 is, completely neutral, I feel nothing one way or the other. 4, stop eating. 5, I ate too much, I went too far, my belly's too full. And then as we start to get the nuances of, what is a 2.5, what is a 4? Hey, I think I'm at a 7.5. I could probably take 5 more bites and get to an 8. That's going to take some practice. So you can use this scale, however, it's going to, work best based on your journey. No good or bad foods. Like I had mentioned at the beginning of this idea that there are good, bad, right, wrong. We dichotomize foods into 2 columns. Well, what happens when we eat one of these foods that we've labeled as bad or wrong? Well, then we feel bad or wrong. And then the cycle around some poor choices with food are more likely to happen. And so mindful eating really encourages and stresses this balance. And we're going to look at a variety of balanced plates in a little bit because mindful eating can include all foods. Do we need to eat cupcakes every day? No. Is a cupcake the right choice at your grandbaby's birthday party? You betcha. Yes, it is. Because now we've got context, right? And so I really encourage you to challenge your idea around of the foods that you've labeled bad or of the foods that you've labeled good, what makes them that way? You know, what are their defining characteristics or the definition that you're using to say this is a bad food? You'll see some questions there that you can ask yourself. If you have a small portion of what you might label a bad food, is it still bad? Right? So if you are at that grandbaby's birthday party and she walks over to you and says, Grandma, I want to share my piece of cake with you. Well, some people would say that cake is a bad food because it's higher in sugar, it's higher in calories, there's fat in there, you know, white processed flour, blah, blah, blah. But your grandbaby just said, I want to share a piece of cake with you. I don't know about you, but I think it would be a bad choice to say, nah, I'm not going to do that. No, let me take a couple bites. Let's share in this moment together, right? On the flip side, if you've got your list of good foods, a lot of times people say vegetables are good foods. Well, what happens if you eat, let's say, too many carrots? Okay, you're eating pounds of carrots a day. Your skin's going to turn orange. Okay, carrots are a source of beta carotene, which is a precursor to vitamin A, which is a fat-soluble vitamin, and it is much easier to go overboard and have a toxicity of fat-soluble vitamins than our water-soluble vitamins that our body can just urinate out extras. So if we eat too much of this vitamin A, we could have a problem, right? I don't want my skin turning orange. And so we really need to look at the context, and it's just not these blanket statements of that's bad and that's good, right? I work with diabetes, and so we talk about carbs all the time. Well, I think that carbohydrates are a kind of important part of our food system. They are the number one fuel source for brain cells and red blood cells. To not eat any carbs can come with some consequences. And so this idea that we need to remove or only do or all this or none of that can really get us in that cycle of the guilt and the shame, and we just aren't practicing that balance. And so I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of their thoughts around these particular foods and how they're labeling them, because it can make it easier or harder to practice mindful eating. So when we've done this presentation in the past, when we were in person pre-COVID, you know, eons ago, I would pass out at this point a handful of raisins, a couple to each person, and we would do this 6-minute mindful eating exercise where we really practice the techniques that we talked about tonight in terms of savoring. What does it smell like? What does it feel like? Leave it on the tongue, you know, experience how it changes. What are your thoughts around it? This is a free video that you can listen to. And so if you are interested in just getting your toe wet of like what mindful eating might be, like I said, it's about a 6-minute, relatively quick, right? Mindful eating video about raisins. Now, you could do anything, it doesn't have to be raisins, but I did want to include this on there because I think it's a nice practice session as you start to figure out like what is mindful eating going to be like, you know, with more complex meals or larger snacks, that type of thing. So mindful eating gives you the skills that you need to deal with those food-related impulses. It slows us down. It makes sure that we are taking into consideration more than just there's food in front of me and I'm going to eat it. It allows us to really evaluate, why am I doing this? How much of this am I going to do? And then if I've chosen to participate in that eating act, I'm really engaging all of my senses. I'm mindful of my self-talk and the thoughts that I'm having while I'm eating this. I'm stopping when my body is telling me to stop. It's really removing that impulsive nature, impulsive action around food, and allowing you to not only be proactive, but also very much in the moment so you can make the best choice for yourself in that moment. So what does that mean? Well, like I said, I'm in a pretty consistent habit right here at work. I've got the same schedule most days of the week. And so boom, my body's in a routine. On non-work days though, on a day that I might be more active, I'm going to eat differently. You might find that on certain weekdays, maybe you do, a group Zumba class or water aerobics or something over at the Y or Westwood. Your hunger cues may very likely be different on that day than a day that you're lounging inside because it's snowing and you don't have to go outside. And that's okay. But thinking that I'm always going to eat the same way, I'm always going to fill up my tank the same way, regardless of what my body needs, it's a lot of times what gets us into trouble, especially with weight management. So, mindful eating allows you to be proactive and in the moment and make the best choice for you in that moment and on that particular day. I did include some additional resources, both online and books, that do address this topic of mindful eating and really addressing and learning how our relationship and choices around food might connect to other parts of our life. Again, those triggers, whether it be stressors, emotional eating, habitual eating. Well, I've always had a bedtime snack of cookies and milk. Well, these are some resources that might allow you to dig a little deeper, unpack what that is, and really evaluate, is that the best choice for you at this season in your life? So I know that Ashley had sent out the PowerPoint. So all of this is included. You don't need to, try to jot down a bunch of notes. As long as you got that PowerPoint, this will be one of those slides. So now as we transition into managing portions, I want everybody to remember what we've talked about so far, because portions and the portions that we choose for ourselves individually, yes, we can use some of the tools that I'm going to talk about this evening, but the number one and most important individualized tool you have in your back pocket is being a mindful eater, because the portions and the amount of food that's right for you is going to be decided by you and by your stomach and by that fuel tank and how empty it is. So for those of us that have been around just a little bit, we know that portions have changed. And so we're going to take a look at how drastic some of those portions are. The first thing I've included is this funny little Kathy, comic, but it's so true, right? If we look at hamburgers or cookies or beverages or popcorn from the 50s to at this point, they published this in the 90s, things got larger. And I'm going to tell you, from 40 years ago today, restaurant portions are at a minimum 40% larger than they used to be. Okay, so if we were ordering a small back in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, and we order that same small today, it was likely the large size that you were having years ago. And so we really need to be mindful about how this portion distortion and how we are served so much food can really impact our perception of what's the right amount. When we think about going out to eat, how often do they serve you on a platter, not a plate? And if you haven't thought about that, the next time that you go somewhere and you order, your fish fry, or you order your steak, mashed potatoes, veggies, blah, 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 whatever, I want you to ask yourself, do you have plates that size at home that they've served you on? Or is that in your stack of platters that you're bringing out when you got a family style dinner to serve for and your plates are much smaller? Portions have just gotten so big over the years. And so I pulled out some average calorie numbers between some very common portion changes that have happened. When we compare coffee years ago, it would have been a cup of coffee. You might have gotten, a little shoot or a whole milk. And even with a little bit of sugar, it was still only in an 8-ounce mug. Today, you go and get coffee, and it's one of those mocha chocas, blah, blah, blahs, and you can get it in 16 or 32 ounces, comes with all the things. We're looking at over a 300 calorie difference between a coffee then and a coffee today. And that's not to say that the coffee is the only part of our breakfast, right? Back in the day, it might have been the coffee with a slice of toast and an egg. Okay, well balanced, calorically appropriate. Today, we're getting that large coffee, and then we're getting the bagel, and we're getting the bagel sandwich or whatever. Well, something that maybe used to be 300 calories, a breakfast could easily clock in at 1,000. And if we aren't being mindful and we're not doing the hunger, fullness, and all the things, well, it's easy for that to go down the hatch, especially if we're doing it in the car driving to work. The bagel has gotten bigger over the years, right? It used to be about 3 inches, and now your standard bagel that you might get from Panera, the bakery, is on average about 6 inches. So it's doubled in size, and the calories have doubled in size. I don't like to call it a mini bagel because it's not really mini. It's actually, an appropriate size for a bagel. But when you think about purchasing a mini bagel, that is actually a bagel portion. These bagels that we get, for example, from Panera, let's say through a diabetes lens, actually count as 4 starch servings or 4 carb servings in one single bagel versus those mini bagels were about 1 and 1.5 servings. Well, there we go. Pizza, right? Our larges today are not the same size larges that we had in the past. And so 2 slices of pepperoni pizza years ago would have been a good hefty 500 calories. Today it's easily 850, and that's to say that you didn't get thick crust or you're not adding extra things to it. It's now pepperoni and sausage. Things are looking bigger. Even something like a salad. Salads back in the day, your chicken Caesar on average came in at about 1.5 cups for a 400-calorie meal. Today, it's 3.5 cups. It's 400 calories more. And this is something, when we think about a salad, it's so easy for our brain to go, oh, well, that's a good choice, right? That's a healthier choice. Absolutely, a salad can be a more nutritious choice than some other things. But then if we consider how many croutons and dressing and if it's grilled chicken versus fried chicken that we're putting on here, and it's coming 3 times bigger than it needs to be, and we aren't going to moderate that, right? We might struggle with a little clean plate club mentality. We're going to eat the whole thing, can make it hard for us to stay on track. Popcorn, back in the day, right? You went and got yourself a tub of popcorn or a bag. I don't even know if they had tubs back then. And on average, it was about 5 cups. So that's 270 calories from that movie theater popcorn with all that yummy butter. Now you get that large tub that seems like the more economical deal because, well, if you finish it, we'll give you a free refill and you can have more. Well, that single tub by itself is 630 calories. And now it's, well, I want to get a good deal, right? That what I call buffet mentality. Well, I want to get my money's worth. Well, I also want you to ask yourself, one, how are you defining what getting your money's worth is? If the only way that we're defining that is based on quantity consumed, that is a very slippery slope. Are you getting your money's worth because you enjoyed the movie and you got to go with family and friends and popcorn is, a pastime and you got to share it with everybody and it enhanced the experience? Okay. Did you get your money's worth because you're walking out of there feeling satisfied and energized and good and happy with your choice, and you're not finding like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm swelling up already from all that salt, or all of it ballooned in my stomach and I feel like I have that brick sitting there. My family and I are now going to dinner and my dinner's ruined because, well, I overdid it. So you really got to ask yourself, what when we have that thought about I got to get my money's worth, how are we defining that? If it's simply based on quantity, that can be a very difficult thing in practicing portion control or managing portions. But if we can start to figure out what maybe some other definitions of getting our money's worth is, well, now that large tub, even if it's got a refill option and we share it between 4 people and we do finish it, you know what? I really don't want to go back for more. And then sweet treats. I have a chocolate chip cookie included here, but I mean, you could look at things like cheesecake and cupcakes and things that have just gotten taller and filled and bigger over time. Here we can see that chocolate chip cookies on average used to be about 1.5 inches in diameter, and they have more than doubled. Now we go to the bakery or again, those breakfast places, and they've got all the pastries, and these are cookies the size of my face. And so needless to say, they're going to come with a heftier caloric impact. And if we are not moderating that within other choices, or we're just making larger choices with our portions across the day, it's going to be really hard for us to meet and stay at our weight goals if we are, overdoing it. So what are some things that you can do? Well, obviously order smaller sizes, but do know that even a small could have been a medium or a large back in the day. And so we do need to be aware of how that has changed and keep that mindful eating practice. When going out to eat, eating half, sharing it, saving the other half. Anytime we go out, I really encourage folks to think about, if you're ordering a full meal, you are more than likely looking at a minimum of 2 meals on that one plate or platter, if not potentially more. And so if we can plan to share with the person that we've gone to the meal with, or we ask for that to-go box right from the get-go, we put half away. Now we're looking at the plate and saying, okay, I'm going to practice my mindful eating. I'm going to be aware of when I'm halfway through with this, where am I at fullness-wise? Do I think I'm 50% of the way full? How am I going to feel if I finish this? And you know what's the worst thing that happens? You finish what's on your plate, you've done your mindful eating, and you're still hungry. You've got the other half sitting on the chair next to you. You can absolutely take some more out. But I'll tell you, in practice, it's a lot harder when we're looking at all of it and saying, I'm only going to eat half. I'm only going to eat half. I'm only going to eat half. And then those fries taste really good, or that cheeseburger tastes really good. And you're talking to your friend. It's really easy for us to then be distracted. And before you know it, you look down and say, where in the world did all the fries go? I was only going to eat half. Well, we were not being mindful eaters. Be mindful of the extras. So what we're going to do in a little bit is look at some different plates, and you're going to see a real strong focus on vegetables, high fiber options, and proteins. So when we can be making meal and snack choices that are a foundation of our high fiber vegetables or high fiber whole grains and our lean proteins, and then be mindful of those sprinkles or those extras that we might put on, whether they be croutons or dressings or sauces or things on the side. Well, at least the foundation of our meal is really that nutrient dense fiber, good protein, hopefully some healthy fats so we get the balance. And then the things that we know can add up really quickly, we're just choosing smaller portions of. Like I said, here, supplement your meal with high fiber fruits and vegetables, and then you also choose high fiber options. Fiber, fiber, fiber. Standard American does not consume enough fiber. The recommendation for most of us is around 30 grams or more a day. The average American consumes no more than about 10 to 15 grams. Fiber is one of those things that really helps to keep us full. Fiber takes a very long time to digest. It sticks with us. It helps with heart health and cholesterol management, helps to keep us regular. It is imperative for GI health. And so incorporating more high fiber foods in the foundation of your meal and snack choices is really going to get you more bang for your buck in terms of that fullness factor. Because if we simply just reduce the portions of stuff that our body's going to digest very quickly, we're going to be left hungry a lot sooner. But if we can incorporate those higher fiber and lean protein options that physically stay in the stomach, longer, take longer to digest, you're not going to get hungry as quickly. And so it's easier for us to choose portions that match our needs and not need to engage in portions, 6, 7, 8 times a day through all of our snacking behaviors. So a little kind of mix and match, which food matches the size on the left and the right. So when we look at 3 ounces of lean meat, something like chicken or turkey or lean steak or pork, we'd be looking at about the size of a smartphone, or in the past, we've used a deck of cards. Now, please know that that is a 3D model, okay? So I have had folks say, oh, well, like a filet mignon, right? I look down on the plate and it kind of looks like a deck of cards. Yeah, well, it's 3 decks of cards deep, right? So we gotta count all of them. This is a 3D model. Your small baked potato is going to be about the size of a computer mouse. So those big old loaded baked potatoes that we can get from some of these restaurants can easily be up to 60 or more grams of carbs, or potentially 4 carb servings for a single potato. Okay. A medium-sized banana is going to be about the length of a number 2 pencil. And when we talk about a 1/4 cup of nuts, this is going to be about the size of a golf ball-ish. And then your 1 cup of raw vegetables would be equivalent to the baseball. Now, as we cook something down, especially those vegetables, the portion does change a little bit because, right, we're cooking down the cell walls, potentially removing some of the water content. And so it's physically just not going to take up as much space. So you'll see a 1/2 cup measure, which would count for cooked fruits and vegetables or grains, is going to be about the size of a light bulb. And please know that that is cooked grains. So anytime that we are portioning out something, we want to do it from its cooked state. 2 tablespoons is about the size of a golf ball. A tablespoon is about the visual of a poker chip. So when they say put a tablespoon of oil in the pan, if you don't want to get a tablespoon measure dirty, let's say you don't want to wash it or you don't have a dishwasher, if you pour it out and you imagine, what a poker chip would look like in your pan, boom, you got about 1 tablespoon. Your 3 ounces of poultry or meat, like I mentioned, deck of cards or a smartphone. 3 ounces of fish, fish being less dense, usually having a higher water and kind of air content compared to our poultries or meats. A little bit larger at the size of a checkbook. I really need to think of something that's equivalent to that that's not a checkbook, because I realize that maybe as we get later and later, not everybody's going to know what a checkbook looks like and its size, but I'm hoping everybody can visualize that. 1 ounce of lunch meat, so that's kind of your deli meat, whether that be your roast beef, jerky, ham, is about the size of a CD. And then 1.5 ounces of cheese would be equivalent to about a lipstick tube, or another visual would be about 3 to 4 dice stacked up on top of each other. So those, blocks of cheese that we get at the grocery store easily are 8 servings. Now, I know some people have looked at me, eyes get all big, like I get maybe 2 or 3 servings because I'm just chunking, right? It's about a 1 inch, half-inch cut. What I like to do, kind of like with the butter, right? It comes with those cut, is when you get a block of cheese, open up the full package while it is still in its full block and take a knife and just etch out in the corners. Like, okay, if I know that there's 8 servings because I checked the label, I'm going to go right down the middle. Now I've got 2. And now I'm going to cut each one of those and I'm going to break it up so that, boom, I've got 8 even servings. So as I go back in a week from now and some of the cheese is missing, oh, I've got that little etch marked out. I know where to cut to know what it is. The other thing you could do is just cut it all and leave it in a baggie, a separate baggie, and have those individual portions already measured out. So, like I mentioned, we were going to look at some examples of balanced plates. As a reference, I want everybody to look at the bottom right part of this screen where we see our standard American diet, otherwise known as SAD, S-A-D. We can see that it does not have as much balance with all of our different nutritious food groups as at least the My Plate that's next to it, and certainly not like any of the ones that you'll see next. But there is a big focus on those higher starch, your white rices, white breads, processed grains, a lot of animal proteins, very small amounts of our fruits and vegetables and greens. And if we compare that to the My chart that's next, or the My Plate that's next to it, we can see that each one of these portions have a much more equal or balanced area on the plate. We've got 50% of it being fruits and vegetables, about a quarter is grains, a quarter is protein, and if we choose to incorporate dairy, an 8-ounce glass or a 5 to 6 ounce portion of yogurt would be on the side. Now, ideally, we are choosing the most unprocessed versions of these different food groups. The less processed it is, generally the more nutrition that will naturally be within it, right? When we think about whole grains versus white grains, whole grains have all the fiber, the iron, the B vitamins. Our white rices or our white flours, our white breads are going to have a lot of that stripped away, and we're going to be left with a lot of just the starch. And so we aren't getting the benefits of some of those nutrients, and especially not the fiber content. Another example of a balanced plate for folks that are managing their diabetes and their blood sugars is 50% of the plate is now going to be our low carb vegetables. And what are those? Those are going to be your lettuce and broccoli and cauliflower and asparagus and Brussels sprouts and cucumbers and zucchini and celery and all of our really low carb veggies. Versus in the corner there, we see grains and starchy vegetables. Remember that potatoes of any kind, corn, and green sweet peas are what we consider starchy vegetables. And so they're more similar nutritionally to our rice, pasta, and breads. And so we're going to put them in that higher carb quadrant. But when we're managing our diabetes and blood sugars, 75% of the plate being those high fiber, low carb vegetables and good lean proteins, and then moderating portions of those inherently higher carb foods allows us to manage our blood sugars a lot better. If we are following a whole food plant-based eating plan, whether that be your version of vegan or traditionally whole food plant-based, we can see we're not going to have any animal products. There's a really big focus on our leafy green covered vegetables. We're going to have our nuts and seeds and avocados for great plant-based heart healthy fats. We've got our whole grains, beans, legumes, and starchy vegetables for some of those complex carbohydrates, but also all great sources of dietary fiber. We've got a quarter of the plate for our whole fruits. These ideally we're having, the whole apple, not the apple juice. We want to eat it in its whole form. And then a really big focus on hydration and water intake. The Mediterranean diet, which has been widely studied and year after year is considered one of the top eating plans in terms of overall nutrition and longevity. Again, we see a very big focus on those low carb vegetables, 50% of the plate. And then we're incorporating whole grains, beans, and then ideally our low fat protein foods, keeping in mind that the fat that we consume from animal sources is generally higher in saturated fat. So this is going to be highly marbled steaks, chicken skin, right? The fat cap around a pork chop. These animal-based fat sources are, like I said, just higher in saturated fat. And there's a lot of research to support a higher intake of unsaturated fats that we can get a good amount from our plant-based foods. But again, we see this balance, really big focus though on fibers and a lot of veggies.